So, you want to know what processor you need? Processors are one of the most expensive parts in a computer, and there's a lot of confusion surrounding them. There's all these terms like cache, hyperthreading, turbo boost, clock speed, transistors, etc., which a lot of people sort through with the attitude of, I'll just pay more to be safe and not have to think about it. To which I hang my head and weep, because how safe is it to spend a lot more money on something that won't actually make a real difference in your life? Anyway, after this video, hopefully that won't be you. This video is going to help clear it all up by giving you some grounding and basic knowledge of what's out there and what your favorite apps actually need. And I'll keep it simple without all the computer terms. Over 80% of computers and laptops come with Intel CPUs, so I'll be using them as my examples for that reason and because most people are familiar with the Core i branding. You've heard of it: Core i3, Core i5, Core i7, they even have Core i9 now. And I have to level with you, for more than 95% of users, it's all smoke and mirrors. A Core i3 of any flavor is far more than enough for most common tasks that the great majority of people use. Microsoft Office, Skype, web browsing with tons of tabs, streaming music or Hulu and Netflix and YouTube, posting on social media, and except for maybe early generation i3s on laptops, because laptop versions of the same processors are often about half as powerful as their desktop counterparts, pretty much any game on the market. It even does light to moderate photo and video editing just fine with zero slowness. Here's why. If it's a Core i processor at all, it means it's among the best in existence. Think about it. There's so many processor options out there: Rockchip, Celeron, Atom, Pentium, Snapdragon. They all have one goal: to run your favorite programs and apps at the lowest possible cost. But the Core i series is different. Intel made it to be head and shoulders above all of them. And except for the very latest offerings from AMD, the Threadripper and Ryzen series, they are. They cream everything else on the market, which is why Intel charges a premium for those chips. They've known that no one else can touch them. So then, if an i3 is more than you need, why do we have i5 and i7? Well, the short answer for most people is marketing. Intel makes a lot more money off selling you an i5 or an i7 than they do a lower price processor, and they know that people feel better by buying something that's higher rated. But there are a few areas which I would recommend buying one of these higher of the high-end chips. The first is video editing on the pro level, or anything that involves multiple layers. Editing video involves processing multiple things at the same time, and more cores, though not always a great measure of performance overall, help significantly when all those simultaneous layers are being processed. But again, even the lowest i3 can handle this fairly well. So why spend the extra dough? The answer is one word: exporting the video. With a few exceptions, the editing process is basically the same unless you're doing something really complicated, even if you're doing it on an i3. You make your cuts, you add fancy transitions and text, and then you export it. But if you're making a lot of videos in the same day, you can't do what most people do, which is take a break when the video exports. You need that video as soon as possible. Exporting on a higher rated chip will save you as much time as there is horsepower on that chip. For example, exporting a 3-minute video goes about 50% faster on my 1000 i7 system as my $400 i3 system. But there, you see, is the issue. That extra cost for such a once-in-a-while benefit for most people simply doesn't justify the extra cost. Again, for most people. A professional is willing to pay a premium for such a small benefit if that task is more common for them. And when time is money, they probably should. The second reason is laptops. Remember, everything is a lot less powerful typically in a laptop versus a desktop, and so to get a good everything runs smoothly with power to spare feel, you'll often benefit from an i5 instead of an i3, especially if you plan on doing any sort of heavy editing on the go. The third reason is just wanting your computer to last longer. Just because a Core i3 can handle most things well today doesn't mean it will always, even though I think there's strong evidence that it will. I'm very happy still with the performance of my Core i3 processor from 2009 for most everything. But there really is a certain amount of safety in buying one step higher if you think you'll want this computer to last or run the latest and greatest things from the future that haven't been invented yet. Speaking of apps from the future, a few of them are already here in the form of what I called specialty programs. Programs that are trying to do things on a computer that we just weren't even thinking about when the Core i series first launched. Things like live streaming a game at max settings in 4K to Twitch, or webcasts that involve more points of interaction than just streaming video to multiple users, or 3D imaging and scanning software that aims for CIA-level fidelity. These and a few other apps often benefit from all the horsepower you can afford. It doesn't always make a difference, but if you know your app is bottlenecked by CPU, like transcoding a lot of videos for a Plex server, or your industry requires it, you obviously will benefit from paying more with an i5 or an i7. Gaming doesn't really make the list. I'm very confident in saying you can have a perfectly smooth and good-looking gaming experience on a pretty inexpensive i3 processor. Heck, Intel Yorkfield Core 2 processors from all the way back in 2008 will run a surprising amount of games very, very well when placed with a great graphics card. Gamers should only pay for an i5 or an i7 when they want that rig in that special case to last forever, they want to do VR, or they literally are a pro gamer and the difference between having 100 frames per second and having 120 frames per second gives them peace of mind when they're playing for money. Yes, you can find gamers and websites that claim otherwise. They'll point to graphs that show small FPS increases with the newest $800 i7 processor and proclaim it necessary to buy to have a great gaming experience. But I argue that those people are completely out of touch with normal people. A normal person is perfectly happy playing a game on medium-high settings at 40 to 60 frames per second, which again, an i3 can more than handle typically. I've been a gamer since I was 12 and I can't even tell the difference between high settings and ultra settings. After you meet a minimum standard, a game is still a game. One more thing while I'm on this soapbox, age of the processor. I've always said that Core 2 processors are still plenty capable game machines despite being almost a decade old. Well, even if wanting your system to last a long time is your reason to pay more for a Core i5 or a Core i7, you should know that Intel has actually improved their chips only by very small margins with each generation of processors. Because again, only until very recently have they had any real competition in the high-end market. A 2009 i5 performs 96% as well in the majority of games as the very latest $300 i5 processors do. In short, the difference between a Core i3 and an i7 may be large in a few tasks where raw horsepower makes a noticeable difference, but the difference between an older generation of the same core is barely noticeable to the average person typically, and near non-existent in gaming. If saving money is important to you, you're pretty safe buying an older i3, i5, or i7 chip. They still perform phenomenally well and cost loads less than the latest chips that are laughably overpriced. Finally, in all of this, I give you my greatest tool, a secret weapon, a way to cut through all the BS and get to an actually accurate measure of that specific processor you're looking to buy or thinking about buying. It's called CPUbenchmark.net. They make a program called PassMark which gives each processor a raw score that they come up with by averaging thousands upon thousands of tests for each processor. Better than any other service, it compares CPUs pretty objectively and accurately without all the marketing buzzwords. Just Google the model of your processor and the word PassMark and it'll be one of the first things that come up. Here are some key indicators to help you know what processor is best for you when you're buying. Any processor with a score of around 1600 will do all office and web tasks just fine with no major slowdowns. It'll handle more than half of all video games on Steam as well. A processor with a score of around 2100 will play over 75% of Steam games and is the minimum to have a good Photoshop or editing videos experience if you're willing to put up with a relatively long export time. A processor with a score of 3500 will run any game in late 2017 at modest settings perfectly fine. After 4000, it's largely just gravy. I've run virtual reality apps on an i3 with a score of just under 4000, and it did 90 frames per second with 0 dropped frames. When paired with a great gaming graphics card, you are set to go as an average gamer. A score of 5000 is typically where i5s start, and again, is more than most people need, but is good if you want to be safe for the future or have a specific need. So there you have it. You now have about 20 years of processor experience boiled down into one video. If you remember anything, may it guide you to save a lot of money in your decision to buy a new computer. Oh, and in case you were wondering, as I'm editing this, I have 16 Office documents open, 22 tabs, 8 different apps, I'm streaming music, watching a YouTube video, and editing this video. What's my processor? A first-generation Core i3 processor on a laptop. The PassMark score is not even 2,000 points. Happy shopping!